Good morning. Empezamos la sesión. I will speak in Spanish. Lo primero es...
Good morning. I'd like to call the committee to order, and first let's adopt the agenda. Has anyone any objection to that agenda? We can take that as adopted then. Now we come to the second consideration of the draft report on Turkey, and I'd like to tell the committee that Sorry, no, it wasn't Turkey, it was the global strategy that's put off to next week, that is. So, Mrs. Piri has the floor. Together with the shadow rapporteurs, she's been looking at some 545 amendments, of which 37 compromise amendments have been made, covering, among other things, the Union's relations with Turkey, including cooperation on immigration, the rule of law, and fundamental freedoms, as well as the worrying situation in the southeast of the country, foreign policy, and the reunification discussions on Cyprus. Mrs. Piri for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Before we start the second consideration of the 2015 Turkey report, let me first take this opportunity to express, on our behalf, the sincere condolences to the families of the victims of the recent bomb attacks in Ankara. I believe I speak on behalf of all of us if I say we mourn with the Turkish people and we reaffirm our support to combat the shared threat of terrorism. Then on the report itself, Chairman, actually you already gave a very good summary of it. Together with my colleague rapporteurs from the other groups, we spent the last 2 weeks negotiating on these 545 amendments and drafting 37 compromises. And I would hereby like to express my gratitude to them because I think in the end we managed to find a common line which overall can be supported by all the political groups in the Parliament. The main conclusions in the report, as will be voted in AFET this afternoon, and as has been expressed in these 37 compromise amendments. Some points. There is a general concern, a serious concern, that the overall pace of reforms not only slow down in Turkey, but in key areas such as freedom of expression and the independence of the judiciary, there has even been a regression. There is a clear condemnation from our part on the pressure which is being put by the government on all critics. These include journalists, as we saw the recent crackdown also again on Zaman newspaper and Sihan news agency, but also many other outlets. The crackdown when it came to the academics who signed their call for peace, but also the intimidation which opposition members are being faced with almost on a daily basis. This is, I think, the main starting point of the report. Then there is a clear call for the violence in the southeast to end and peace talks to restart. We condemn the return to violence by the PKK, which is still on the EU's terror list, but also the large-scale curfews which have been implemented by the government, by the security forces, which in the end put the citizens of the people living in these Kurdish areas, 355,000 according to the Turkish ministry itself, who had to leave their houses. And this is of course of great concern, and we all believe that the EU should be paying much more attention to this. And then in the end there is a call to intensify our dialogue on all these matters, and best to do so is within the framework of the accession process. And here I come to the topic which will be of course also later debated this week on migration. We praise the Turkish population for the burden they've been carrying in hosting the largest refugee population in the world, and we are in principle not against talking with Ankara on finding solutions to this refugee and migrant crisis. But there is a clear call from the groups in this parliament to decouple this from the accession talks. The accession talks are a merit-based process, and they should not be a tit-for-tat as one of the things you can negotiate on when talking about migration. And that also brings me to the point of no one-dimensional dialogue with the Turkish government just on how many people are arriving on a daily basis on the Greek islands. We have to look also on the internal developments in Turkey. The standards for visa liberalization must be met, we also call on the Turkish government to lift the geographic scope on the Geneva Convention, so also Iraqi and Afghan refugees can ask for asylum. In the end, we very much welcome and praise the considerable progress achieved in the reunification talks of Cyprus. We underline the importance of finding a solution to this decades-long Cyprus problem, which is so important for the whole region and, of course, Europe included. We call on Turkey and all international actors to support a positive outcome of this process. And let me, in the end, once again also thank the AFET Secretariat, but also the staff of all the political groups who worked almost on a full-time, 24-hour basis in order to make it possible that we have this debate here today and we have a vote this afternoon in AFET. So, Chair, I'll leave it with that. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señora Piri.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Piri. Now let's come to the shadow rapporteurs for 3 minutes each, starting with Mrs. Sommer of the EPP.
Vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I too would like to express condolences to the victims of and the families of the victims of the latest terrorist attack. I hope that such things will not happen again, but unfortunately these are unsafe times. I'd like to thank the rapporteur, Mrs. Piri, and the other shadow rapporteurs for the very good cooperation that we've had. We were under enormous time pressure. Actually, originally there was only supposed to be one shadows meeting to put together the compromises, but the subject is actually so complex and the number of amendments was so high, nearly 550, that of course one wasn't enough. So we actually had to meet 3 times last week. And ultimately we agreed on the same line as last year. And that might have made the negotiations simpler. The situation hasn't actually changed in Turkey. There is no progress to be observed in the direction of Europeanizing Turkey, rather the opposite. That's what the rapporteur has confirmed, and I think it's cynical that precisely a day before the last EU-Turkey summit, Zaman was taken into state control, and on the very day of the summit, a further piece of news, a further step very closely connected with Zaman was taken. So I think that's a clear signal that we can do what we like. Turkey will stay as it is. The government will do what it feels like, and the European Union can just grin and bear it. And that certainly applies as far as the refugee crisis is concerned. And all of us group shadow rapporteurs agree, and Katia agrees, that we shouldn't mix the negotiation process with Turkey on the one hand up with the refugee crisis on the other hand. We're not prepared to make concessions to Turkey. There are some things which are not negotiable. Of course, we want a good relationship, but we're not prepared to be put under pressure. This Parliament's task is to make that extremely clear. We know that our heads of state and government in the European Union are under strong pressure because of the refugee crisis, but we're not prepared to support further than our resolution in that direction. Kati Piri has already written in her report that there are some very complicated points. Cyprus is, of course, very high on the agenda, and a solution to the Cyprus issue will be a kind of litmus test for Turkey's Europe willingness. We shouldn't be trying to foreshadow a solution, I think, in this resolution. But I think that a Turkish Cypriot constituent state should be mentioned in the resolution. This is a proposal coming from the Cypriot head of government. My group and I are not excited by this prospect. We think there needs to be progress in negotiations first. In general, I'm grateful, among others, to the Secretariat, which has also been under great time pressure. And I'm under time pressure as well. The chair keeps telling me that I should stop talking, so thank you for your attention. I hope we'll get a good result in the vote. Thank you.
Gracias, señora Sommer.
Thank you, Mrs. Sommer. We have a lot of people on the speakers list, so I'll close it now. And ask colleagues, please, to be very rigorous with the time. Mr. Lambsdorff.
Muchas gracias. Ich werde auch meine Bemerkung erstmal damit beginnen.
I'd also like to start by expressing the condolences of my group for the families of the victims of the attack in Ankara. We've had several attacks in a very short period of time, and the situation in Turkey is very difficult now for the people who have to live there. It's increasing this atmosphere of fear, and of course this extends to the Kurdish area in the southeast of the country. So, to come to the report now, we'd like to thank Kati Piri, Renata Sommer and all of the other colleagues for the very good collaboration we had, including Marika Schake, who represented me in some of the negotiations. It was extremely helpful. We really made a lot of progress in a very short period of time. Now, there are 3 points that are important for my group. In Compromise 9, it is said that there should be a re-evaluation of the process, and I think it's very important for us to stress that here once again. We need to ensure that the process is the correct vehicle for creating new Turkish-European relations. There's still open questions surrounding that, and I think it's very important for this report to contain that idea. Secondly, I think that the language in Compromise number 17, which talks about violent and illicit takeovers of Turkish newspapers, including Zaman, is correct. It's perfectly clear, and we need to make that as clear as possible. Press freedom, freedom of expression, both offline and online, are incredibly important to the Liberal group, and we're talking here about a candidate for accession that is dramatically and very quickly moving away from those values. Thirdly, Compromise 31. I think this is a point on which all groups were able to agree. The question of dealing with the refugee crisis should not be confused with the accession process. The refugee crisis is an acute political challenge that, of course, must be tackled. I have, of course, nothing against having a partnership with Turkey, but not at the price of Europe's values in the accession process. Of course, here I'm talking also about the first Copenhagen criterion. Now, in the report from the Commission, it's not really a progress report, it's quite the opposite. And it's interesting that there were these drastic measures taken against media bodies just before the summit. Now, when it comes to the visa question, I have a rather different position to the Conservatives. I think visa liberalisation might be able to bring about significant improvements. We do need to make progress so that people can travel. And we do have some guests from Turkish civil society today, and they have been able to do that as a result. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Takis, please.
Επειδή η επανάληψη των συλληπιτηρίων προς την Τουρκία μπορεί να δώσει...
Thank you. I would also like to repeat the condolences have been offered to the families of the victims. However, it might seem somewhat bureaucratic. I would also like to offer our very sincere condolences to the victims' families. I immediately sent out a message of condolences to the ambassador here in Brussels. He's from my party, and I contacted him on when I heard about this tragedy. However, these attacks are going to create further tension and a feeling of insecurity in the climate in the country. There can be no doubt that this situation is going to have an impact around the borders of the country and create additional problems on top of the flows of migrants towards Europe. A delegation of members of the parliament has recently gone to Turkey, and I've been told that there's going to be another official visit to the region. As the rapporteur, Mrs. Piri, said, there are 350,000 people who've been displaced around this region. And this is a situation where the European Union has to take decisions in order to put immediate pressure on Turkey and to ensure that Turkey opens up a dialogue on the Turkish question. If the situation continues, there'll only be more attacks, although I hope that won't be the case. And of course, further flows of migrants will arrive in Europe. The closure of the Zaman newspaper shows that freedom of speech is being cracked down on in Turkey, and this is a question where Europe's voice has to be heard loud and clear. That's in the report. We're seeing persecution of academics as well. 1,000 university professors have signed a document which asks for peace talks with the Kurds, and a lot of these people have been fired from their jobs. I would like to congratulate Mrs. Piri because she's done some excellent work and she's made a real effort to find the correct balance and a compromise in her report. And she does respect all of the different positions here. We have nothing against the Turkish people or against any people. We want to work with the Turkish people and to work against the fearmongers in the Turkish capital that are creating this feeling of terror amongst its citizens. On Cyprus, we support everything that's said in the report, and we think it's going in the right direction. There's a reference to the Turkish colonies in Cyprus. We'll have to see how the vote goes on that. And, of course, there are references to respecting the fundamental values of the European Union. So I'll be very interested, basically, to see who will vote against that sentence, which refers to the transformation of the Cypriot Republic into a two-state federation. I think we know that this solution might not necessarily be accepted.
Tack så mycket. Jag kommer att tala svenska så ni får ha lurarna på er.
Thank you. I'm going to be speaking Swedish, so I'd like to ask all of you to put your headphones on, please. I too would like to express my condolences to the victims of the recent attacks in Ankara, but also to those who have passed away as a result of this war that has broke out between Erdogan and the Kurds. Many people have lost their lives, and our priority now must be to put an end to this violence, because this will actually endanger progress being made in Turkey otherwise. Now, what is very important in this report is that the European Parliament calls upon both parties to put a stop to the violence and to return to the negotiating table in order to come up with a peace agreement. If there can be no peace between Turkey and the Kurds, it will not be possible to solve the other problems. that Turkey is currently facing. The situation is very worrying, not just in the southeast of the country, but, as the rapporteur says, also when it comes to freedom of the press, human rights, and so on. We're seeing steps backward rather than steps forwards. And we wanted to have a report in which we could talk about progress being made in Turkey, but unfortunately that's not the case. Furthermore, I would like to warn against confusing migration questions and accession questions. Because when it comes to the accession negotiations, we cannot go back on our fundamental values, but we don't want Turkey to close its borders to migrants either. Our fundamental values must be stressed and maintained during the negotiations, and we cannot simply suddenly give priority to own interests, i.e. closing the borders. And if we only condemn one party in the conflict, that would be an error. We need to condemn both parties to the conflict and their acts of violence and their infringement of human rights. We will be able to support most of the compromise amendments. We might abstain on one or two, but in principle you have our support for those. But we do have some reservations. I mean, of course, we've got the question of illegal migration. That's one of the questions that we're going to pose, because we don't think there is such thing as illegal migration. All people have a right to asylum. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora Valero.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Valero. We'll now open up the debate. I will just repeat, we are getting behind time, so I'd ask you all please to stick to 1 minute. Mr. Plenković.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to our rapporteur, Madame Piri, all the shadow rapporteurs for their hard work. My condolences to the Turkish authorities for the horrible terrorist attack which occurred a few days ago. Unfortunately, another one. Turkey is an extremely important partner of the European Union, and it is a key not only for the regional stability in its various neighborhoods, but most notably in the Middle East, and it is a partner that needs to be a part of the solution for the biggest migratory and refugee crisis that we have, and this is perhaps the leitmotif of the whole context that this report is taking place. And therefore the talks and the partnership which the various European institutions have with Turkey is of the essential importance. Turkey is also a country negotiating accession. It started on the same day, on the 3rd of October in Luxembourg 2005, as my country did. That is now more than 10 years ago. The progress that we have seen over the past years was partial. However, it is my firm belief that going in that direction and putting further efforts in the reform process, especially in the judiciary, rule of law, freedom of media, freedom of expression, is an essential element for Turkey's way forward. Therefore, I think that the compromises that were reached send a strong signal to the Turkish partners at this particular point of time, and I hope we will find a good, solid text at the end of the day. Thank you.
Señor Papadakis.
Mr. Papadakis.
Ευχαριστώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε. Η φετινή έκθεση...
Thank you, Chair. The report largely reflects the situation in Turkey. Sadly, day after day we're seeing attacks on democracy in Turkey, something that we cannot welcome. On the efforts to solve the Cypriot issue, I can't comprehend the fact that there's no reference to the fact that any solution has to be compatible with community acquis and has to respect the fundamental values of the European Union. This has to be a question of principle for us as a parliament. Today, Europe is facing a crisis, and its founding principles are in crisis. This is a huge problem for me, and it's something that should be tackled in this report as well.
President, well, on behalf of the ECR Group, I also send my condolences to the victims of the Ankara terrorist attack. Turkey remains a huge challenge in terms of its governance, human rights problems, from the takeover of Zaman, the newspaper, to the arrest of journalists, to the extraordinary warnings issued by President Erdogan on the independence of the Constitutional Court, which released recently 2 journalists who exposed the story of arms supplies to jihadists in Syria, also to the bombings of the Kurdish areas and the resumption of hostilities with the PKK. Nevertheless, Turkey and the EU deal over the refugees remains the only possible way of stemming the flow to Greece, but the price being asked is very high, both in terms of the EU accelerated accession process, visa liberalisation, the financing, and in terms of pressure on Cyprus to lift its EU accession negotiations veto without Turkey first implementing the 2005 Ankara additional protocols, which should allow Turkish ports to be opened up to Cypriot shipping and to recognise Cyprus as an independent state. However, there is hope that in 2016 that Turkey might finally agree to a bi-zonal, bi-communal reunification deal for Cyprus.
Thank you.
And I pray that also the border with Armenia may be opened. I have to say that this is a very difficult report. We support the report. But in my country, in the EU membership referendum campaign, sadly, Turkish membership of the EU is now being brought up by those who wish for Britain to leave the European Union. So it's become a very controversial subject in the United Kingdom as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. This debate and the vote today takes place at a moment when EU-Turkey relations are highest on the agenda, and the spotlight it's under is actually highly controversial. And frankly, it's been a surreal experience to see the unfolding of events where everything that was frozen for so long, accession, visa liberalisation, as well as a delay by the European Commission of publishing the report ahead of the elections, instantly became fluid. The member state governments have hastily traded away principles, but for what? For the hope that Turkey will solve the EU's problems, the problems that EU leaders can't. We have to be careful that this would never happen over the backs of people. It's a very questionable gamble, and the price of principles and credibility has already been paid. Many people in Europe and in Turkey are deeply disappointed of what they're seeing unfolding. And our group, and I'm glad to hear this committee and our House, do focus on principles like human rights, the rights of all people in Turkey, Kurdish people, Alevi people, LGBT people, women. Fundamental rights of all people in Turkey are important, but particularly the freedom of expression, press freedom and internet freedom are key. Broadly speaking, the rule of law must be restored, a separation of power and checks and balances has to be at the core of our attention. It is not too late for the EU member states to hear our clear message before the deal is actually solidified, because a lot of it is still unclear.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. La palabra al señor Christoforou.
Mr. Christoforou has the floor.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι, θέλω να επιστήσω την προσοχή σας.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to draw your attention to a very important point in the report. I plan to defend the founding values of the European Union, including in this report. Turkey's accession isn't just about the European Union, it's mainly about Turkey. And I would recall that Cyprus, on the 3rd of October of 2005, did give a green light to Turkish accession. However, Turkey hasn't applied the protocol that it's itself signed. Not only does it not apply it, but it continues to provoke us by not recognising the European member country Cyprus. If another candidate country didn't recognise a country, would they have the right to open up new negotiating chapters? I don't think they would. So it's not just a red line for Cyprus. The European Union as a whole should have this as a red line. Also, everyone else has had a minute and a half, so can I. The question of Turkish colonies. This is a serious question, and we can't say that we don't agree with the fact that the report doesn't cover the issue of colonies, of Turkish colonies. And the second point is that this is a fundamental value of the European Union. They have to be respected, and all colleagues should respect that. Mr. Mavridis. Thank you, Chair. I'll start by saying that human suffering is universal, and we're seeing that once again in the latest loss of life that we've seen in Ankara. But pain on the loss of human life is just the same in Kurdish regions as well. Moving on to the report now. Now, we talk about the Turkey Progress Report last year as well. I would ask colleagues, what is wrong in Turkey? And I would answer by saying the following. We keep signing agreements and Turkey never agrees and never implements them. Now, if we're talking about another member state who had started up accession talks 10 years ago, what would we do? Turkey has to apply the fundamental rights and founding principles, as we've heard, and that goes for Cyprus too. And this is something that we have to insist on. We can't expect someone else to do that for us. Just another couple of points. Protocol 10 refers to community acquis and Cyprus. We have the Cypriot Republic. There is no other state.
Ευχαριστώ, Πρόεδρε. Με την έκθεση αυτή
Thank you, Chair. This report basically abolishes the Cypriot Republic. We're going to be responsible for the establishment of basically an Islamist state inside Europe. I don't think anyone wants to be responsible for that. We don't refer to any particular peoples. We don't refer to European principles as the basis for the solution to the Cypriot problem. We continue to talk about a problem which the Cypriot people will never ever accept. This solution would violate the rights of Cyprus's people forever. There is a protocol, and that provides for the application of the community acquis, including in the occupied part of Cyprus. This would be a violation of the European Union fundamental rights, and as the European Parliament, we have to oppose that. Yes, I'm concluding now. I would just say that I would like to thank the colleague who allowed me to speak. When it comes to migrants and refugees in Turkey, all they're doing is allowing the mafia to exploit these poor people.
Thank you very much.
Sorry for...
Yes. I would like to support the report. It is balanced as usual, and it disclosed the complexity of the situation in Turkey. There are tragic events and events which make us worried. The problems of Turkey are, some of them are homemade, some of them are important, and we should take it into the consideration. Turkey is not anymore what it used to be a couple of years ago. But it is still our partner, our strategic partner, and it will always be concerning our own security, economic interests, and strategic interests of Europe. We should not fall from one extreme to another extreme in our judgment and our discussions about Turkey. We should take into the consideration that even our debates can influence the situation in Turkey and be something what extreme politicians and authoritarian politics in Turkey can make use of. I would just like to say that we should remember ourselves now in the view of the elections in Germany that the integration of Turkish migrants in Germany and other countries never represented a problem. So maybe we should take a look to this phenomena also. Thank you.
Thank you, señor Weigel. Le doy la palabra al señor Epistedeios.
Mr. Epistedeios has...
Ευχαριστώ, κύριε Πρόεδρε.
Thank you, Chair. Now, undoubtedly, we are against any type of violence, and therefore we condemn the recent attack on Ankara. Innocent lives were lost, and we would like to direct our most sincere condolences to the families. However, violence is part of the Turkish state and impacts on all Turkish citizens. Turkey is also aggressive towards its neighbours. We know that they threaten Greece. They don't recognise Cyprus. They don't recognise part of its territory. They've changed the demographic composition of Cyprus, and we are trying to negotiate with them to solve the refugee crisis. Nothing's going to come of this. If there are any people who are worthy of praise, it's the Greek people, because despite all of the economic difficulties, they're continuing to host all of these immigrants in their country, whereas Turkey exploits this poor people.
Señor Brock.
Mr. Brock, to conclude.
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank Kati Piri and the shadow rapporteurs for coming forward with a report that is well balanced and that helps us move forward. But I'd like to also make some comments about Turkey itself. We know that there are infringements of human rights, of the freedom of religion, the freedom of expression, and more. We also know that this war with the Kurds is unnecessary, and it's just simply a political show of power. For these reasons and for other reasons, I do not see that the accession of a Turkey could be possible. My group warned against this. But now times are changing, and intellectually speaking, I find it very difficult to understand. But we'll have to wait and see. We need to ensure that Turkey retains this sense of democracy, especially in comparison to its neighbouring countries. We need to make sure we keep that in mind. And in all its neighbouring countries, the situation is much worse. So we need to ensure also that we encourage negotiations with Cyprus. Now, at first glance, it would appear to be a good opportunity to achieve reunification of Cyprus. There's a great degree of willingness on both sides, I think, and we need to try and support these negotiations so that we can achieve that aim. Personally, I think the proposal by the Greek Cypriot Prime Minister to include Turkish as a national language is a very interesting idea. This might help to encourage the peace process in parts of the country. And I think it's a very interesting proposal from the Greek Cypriot side, from their Prime Minister. But I don't think it makes sense to remain and continue looking at the past. We need to look forwards. And I think that, whether we like it or not, we need to look to the future, and Turkey is going to play a decisive role when it comes to migration. And if we want to get the number of migrants coming to Europe under control, and we don't want to have all of the migrants ending up in Greece, and if we want to come up with a solution without closing the all other routes, I'm against the closure of the Balkan route, then we are going to have to work together with our neighbours. So I think we need to consider the fact that people are coming over from Turkey, and we don't want to see that border then being closed, because I don't think that would be the right solution. So with all of this criticism that I can fully understand, I do think we need to remain open-minded. Now, no, of course we don't need to accelerate accession. We need 72 votes in the Council of Ministers for accession to be successful, and of course there'll probably be national referenda on this as well. Now, of course, I think we're talking just about opening new chapters, 6 or 7, but we're not talking about full membership of the Turkey imminently. But I think we ought to leave it at that. But of course, we've got visa liberalisation as well. I think it's interesting that we're opening that chapter now, because that also talks about the rule of law, etc. It's quite interesting, because here we could have the start of a real process. This could help us make it clear that Turkey is not yet ready for membership in these areas. And this is also something that is closely linked with visa liberalisation. But they will also have to do the same things as all other countries in these negotiations, and these 72 criteria need to be taken into account, but 15 of them are not yet being observed. We must not make political concessions. I think that's quite clear. But of course, we will only allow the acquis to be applied when they have met the necessary criteria. But I do think the report goes in the right direction. I just wanted to express my personal opinion at this stage as well.
Thank you, Mrs. Brock. Mrs. Piri has the floor to respond.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't expecting to get the floor. I mean, I think the Chair of the committee already did kind of a wrap-up. I think we know the differences in this Parliament among the various groups when talking about Turkey, but I think we can also agree that when we look at today's situation and the analysis we have made, that all major groups in this Parliament actually found an agreement. So there is a bit of unrest, but I guess that's not related to the Turkey report. So, Mr. Chair, I hope that this afternoon we can proceed with a speedy vote on the compromise amendments and of course on the report as a whole, and then for plenary it's foreseen to be voted in April in Strasbourg. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you, Mrs. Piri. We have the vote at 4 o'clock. We'll close